Flames dance across ancient parchment in a forgotten chamber beneath Jerusalem's old city. The scribe's hand trembles as he etches a single letter. 3 tongues of fire rising from a base, burning upward like a divine signature. This letter appears 58,000 times in the Hebrew Bible. It opens the word for destroy. It completes the word for transform. It carries the name of God himself. And in 2026, as the Hebrew calendar turns to 5786, this ancient symbol is burning brighter than ever before. What if everything falling apart in your life right now isn't random? What if the pressure you're feeling, the structures collapsing around you, the fire that seems to consume everything you built? What if it's not punishment, but purification? Before we step into this ancient mystery that rabbis whispered about for centuries, and as we prepare to uncover what this forgotten letter reveals about the spiritual season we're entering right now, there's something you need to know. The letter is called Shin. It looks like fire. It sounds like wind. And according to the sages, it reveals exactly what God is burning away in this very moment. And why? The discovery happened in stages, across centuries, through the hands of scribes who understood something most believers today have forgotten. Hebrew wasn't just a language, it was a code. Every letter carried weight, history, spiritual DNA embedded in its curves and angles. When ancient Jewish mystics studied the letter Shin, they didn't see mere grammar. They saw divine fire manifesting in written form, the same fire that blazed on Mount Sinai, the same consuming presence that refined gold in the temple, the same eternal flame that burns but does not destroy. The sages taught that Shin was the soul of transformation. It appeared in words that meant change, break, return, and peace. How could one letter hold such paradox? How could destruction and restoration share the same symbol? The answer lies not in theology, but in the nature of fire itself. Fire doesn't simply destroy, it reveals, it purifies, it transforms base metal into something precious. And as we enter the Hebrew year 5786, a year marked by the letters Vav and Shin, the ancient symbol is no longer confined to scrolls and synagogues. It's written across the landscape of human experience, burning through lives, relationships, identities, and nations. The question isn't whether you'll encounter this fire. The question is whether you'll understand what it's refining. The letter Shin appears in the earliest Hebrew manuscripts like a primal signature of the divine. 3 vertical strokes rise from a horizontal base, each stroke reaching upward like fingers, grasping toward heaven, or like flames consuming the space above them. Ancient scribes didn't choose this shape arbitrarily. They understood that form carries meaning, that the visual architecture of a letter reveals its spiritual function. When you trace the 3 prongs of Shin in the air, you're drawing fire. The right stroke represents the pillar of fire that led Israel through the wilderness. The center stroke embodies the fire that descended on Mount Sinai. The left stroke symbolizes the eternal flame that burned in the temple, never extinguished, always hungry, always refining. The sages taught that these weren't separate fires, but one fire expressing itself in 3 dimensions: guidance, revelation, and purification. This wasn't abstract mysticism, it was lived theology. Every time a priest approached the altar, every time a prophet encountered the burning bush, every time judgment fell and mercy remained, Shin was present, written not on parchment, but in the atmosphere itself. In the ancient world, fire served multiple purposes. It cooked food, provided warmth, forged weapons, and protected communities from wild beasts. But fire also had a darker role. It consumed the unclean, destroyed the corrupt, and purified metals through intense heat. Hebrew culture understood this duality better than most. The word esh, meaning fire, appears over 370 times in the Hebrew Bible. But Shin doesn't just begin the word for fire. It embodies the concept itself. When God revealed himself to Moses, he didn't appear as a gentle breeze or a still voice. He manifested as fire burning in a bush that would not be consumed. This wasn't symbolic poetry. It was theological precision. God was announcing his nature, a presence so intense it should destroy everything it touches, yet so controlled it can dwell among fragile humans without annihilating them. The fire burned. The bush remained. This is the mystery of Shin. Transformation without obliteration, refinement without rejection, death without finality. The rabbis noticed something else about Shin that modern readers often miss. The letter appears on the mezuzah, the small case affixed to Jewish doorposts containing scripture passages, but it also appears in the word Shaddai, one of God's ancient names, often translated as Almighty, but carrying deeper connotations of sufficiency, power, and boundary. When Shin is written on the mezuzah, it faces outward, toward the world, like a guardian or a warning. The three prongs become a shield, a declaration that this household belongs to the God of fire, the God who refines, the God who transforms. But there's a hidden layer here that most people never discover. In certain mystical traditions, the three strokes of Shin don't just represent fire, they represent the three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the three pilgrim festivals, Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles, and the three dimensions of time, past, present, future. The letter becomes a portal, a doorway into understanding how God works across generations, how he uses fire not to destroy lineage, but to refine it, not to break covenant, but to purify it. And here's where the mystery deepens. The numerical value of Shin in Hebrew gematria is 300. In ancient Jewish numerology, numbers weren't arbitrary. They carried spiritual weight and prophetic meaning. 300 appears in the Bible in contexts of testing and triumph. Gideon's army, reduced to 300 men, defeated a vast Midianite force, not through strength but through divine strategy. Elijah challenged 450 prophets of Baal, but the true test came when fire fell from heaven and consumed the sacrifice. The number 300 became associated with moments when God reduced, refined, and revealed his power through what seemed like weakness. Shin, valued at 300, embodies this principle. It's the letter of the remnant, the refined few, the tested ones who emerge from fire not destroyed, but transformed. What no one expected was that this ancient letter, dormant in dusty scrolls for centuries, would become the defining symbol of an entire generation's spiritual experience. But that's exactly what's happening now. The Hebrew calendar doesn't follow the Gregorian system you're familiar with. While the Western world marked the transition to 2026, the Jewish calendar entered the year 5786, a number that carries profound prophetic weight. In Hebrew numerology, each year is represented by letters, and 5786 breaks down into three components. 5000, the millennium, 700, represented by the letter Shin, and 86, represented by the letters Pei and Vav. But it's the presence of Shin in this year's signature that has ancient prophecy watchers paying attention. Every Hebrew year contains spiritual DNA, encoded messages about the season's character, challenges, and divine purposes. The year 5786 is marked by Shin, the letter of fire, transformation, and divine presence. This isn't coincidence. According to rabbinic teaching, certain years carry intensified spiritual activity, periods when heaven seems closer, when testing becomes more acute, when the veil between the natural and supernatural grows thin. 5786 is one of those years. The sages taught that letters don't just spell words, they shape reality. When a year is marked by Shin, it means the themes associated with that letter will manifest in human experience. Consider what Shin represents: fire that refines, pressure that transforms, breaking that precedes rebuilding. Look around the world right now. Nations are experiencing unprecedented shaking. Economic systems once thought stable are revealing cracks. Long-held beliefs are being challenged. Structures that seemed permanent are proving temporary. Relationships are being tested. Identities are being redefined. This isn't random chaos. It's Shin unfolding across the landscape of human history. The year 5786 carries the energy of divine fire moving through every sphere, personal, national, spiritual. And for those who understand the Hebrew prophetic calendar, this moment isn't surprising. It's right on schedule. The fire was always coming. The question was never if, but when, and what will it burn? But Shin isn't alone in defining this year. It's partnered with Vav, the sixth letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which serves as a conjunction, a connector, a bridge. Vav means and, but it also means hook or nail. It's the letter that links heaven and earth, past and future, judgment and mercy. In ancient Hebrew thought, Vav represents connection, relationship, and covenant. When Shin and Vav appear together in a year's signature, they create a powerful prophetic statement. God is connecting his refining fire to his covenant promises. He's not burning things down out of anger. He's clearing ground to rebuild. He's not destroying for destruction's sake. He's making room for something new. The fire of Shin is being guided by the covenant faithfulness of Vav. This changes everything. It means that whatever is being shaken, whatever is falling apart, whatever feels like it's burning, it's not punishment, it's preparation. The hook of Vav is pulling you through the fire of Shin into something you couldn't access any other way. The number 86, which completes the year 5786, adds another layer. In Hebrew, 86 spells Elohim, the name of God used in Genesis 1 when he creates the heavens and the earth. Elohim is the God of power, the creator who speaks worlds into existence, the architect of reality itself. When the year carries the numerical signature of Elohim, it signals a year of creation, not just destruction. Yes, the fire is real. Yes, the shaking is intense, but underneath the chaos, God is building. He's creating new structures, new identities, new purposes. The old wineskins must burst so the new wine can be contained. The old blueprints must burn so the new designs can be drawn. This is why 2026 feels different. This is why the pressure seems unbearable. This is why so many people feel like they're in a furnace, because they are. But it's not the furnace of judgment, it's the furnace of refinement. And what emerges on the other side won't look like what went in. What happened next would change everything. As the year 5786 began, reports started surfacing from believers around the world, dreams of fire, visions of testing, sudden life upheavals that seemed coordinated by an invisible hand. People who had been comfortable for decades found themselves in crisis. Ministries that had flourished for years encountered unexpected opposition. Relationships that seemed solid began to fracture. And in the middle of the chaos, those who understood the Hebrew calendar recognized the pattern. This wasn't spiritual warfare in the traditional sense. This was Shin, the divine fire doing what it always does, burning away everything that cannot withstand eternity. The prophet Malachi stood at the edge of Israel's darkest spiritual hour and delivered a message that terrified his audience. But who can endure the day of his coming? Who can stand when he appears? For he will be like a refiner's fire or a launderer's soap. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. He will purify the Levites and refine them like gold and silver. The imagery wasn't comforting. The people wanted a conquering king, a political deliverer, a warrior Messiah who would crush their enemies. Instead, God promised fire. Not the fire of war, but the fire of the silversmith's furnace. Intense, controlled, purposeful. The audience didn't understand. Why would God refine his own people? Why subject the priesthood to such heat? The answer lay in the nature of silver itself. Silver doesn't reveal its true value until it's refined. Raw silver, pulled from the earth, is mixed with impurities, lead, copper, zinc, debris from the mine. It looks dull, heavy, worthless. Only fire can separate the precious from the worthless. The ancient refining process was meticulous and painful to watch. The silversmith would place the raw ore into a crucible and thrust it into the hottest part of the furnace. As the heat intensified, impurities would rise to the surface, slag, dross, contaminants that diminish the metal's value. The refiner would carefully skim off the impurities, then return the silver to the fire. Again and again, the process repeated. Heat, skim, heat, skim. The silver would cry out, if silver could cry. It would beg for the process to end, for the heat to stop, for the fire to be extinguished. But the refiner knew something the silver didn't. Premature removal meant premature ruin. Silver pulled from the furnace too soon retained its impurities, weakened its structure, reduced its worth. Only silver that endured the full refining process could be called pure. Only silver that passed through fire multiple times could be trusted for sacred use. And here's the part most people miss. The refiner never left the silver unattended. He sat beside the furnace, watching, monitoring, adjusting the temperature. Too little heat and the impurities remained. Too much heat and the silver itself would be damaged. The refiner's presence wasn't passive observation, it was active protection. The rabbis asked a haunting question: how does the refiner know when the silver is fully purified? The answer became legendary in Jewish teaching: when he can see his reflection in it. The refiner watches the molten metal, waiting for the moment when the surface becomes so pure, so clear, that his own face stares back at him from the crucible. That's the goal. That's the end point. Not destruction, but reflection. Not annihilation, but image-bearing. God isn't refining you to punish you. He's refining you to see himself in you. Every impurity that rises to the surface, pride, fear, control, bitterness, self-reliance, must be skimmed away, not because God is cruel, but because he loves you too much to let you remain less than you were created to be. The fire isn't proof of his anger. It's proof of his investment. You don't refine trash, you refine treasure. The very fact that you're in the furnace means you're valuable. This understanding transforms how we read the rest of Scripture. When Israel stood at the base of Mount Sinai and watched fire descend on the mountain, they weren't witnessing divine wrath, they were witnessing divine presence. Exodus 19:18 says, Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. The people were terrified. They begged Moses to speak to God on their behalf because they feared the fire would consume them. But God wasn't trying to destroy them. He was trying to refine them. He was burning away their slave mentality, their Egyptian idolatry, their false identities. The fire on Sinai was the same fire in the silversmith's furnace. It wasn't random. It was relational. God was saying, I'm not finished with you yet. You're still in process. You're still being shaped. And I will not remove you from the fire until you reflect my image. But here the mystery deepens even further. The fire that refines isn't the fire that destroys. In Daniel 3, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into Nebuchadnezzar's furnace, the fire consumed their ropes but left them untouched. The king looked into the furnace and saw 4 figures instead of 3. The 4th, he said, looked like a son of the gods. The fire didn't harm what God valued. It only burned what bound them. This is the secret of Shin. This is the hidden message of the refiner's fire. What belongs to God cannot be consumed by God's fire. But what binds you, what limits you, what holds you back, that will burn. Hebrew is a language of layers. Every word carries not just meaning, but history, theology, cosmic architecture. When you open a Hebrew lexicon and search for words beginning with Shin, you discover something startling. The letter appears in words that seem contradictory, words that shouldn't belong in the same linguistic family. Shin begins shalom, peace, but it also begins shavar, to break. It opens shav, to return, and it starts shamad, to destroy. How can one letter carry such opposing energies? How can the same symbol represent both peace and destruction, both return and breaking? The answer lies not in contradiction, but in process. Peace doesn't come without breaking. Return doesn't happen without destruction of the false self. The letter Shin doesn't represent opposites. It represents the necessary sequence of transformation. You cannot rebuild what you refuse to demolish. You cannot experience shalom until the structures built on fear, control, and pride are shavar, shattered. The Hebrew word shavar appears 148 times in the Old Testament, and its usage is telling. It's the word used when God breaks the yoke of slavery in Leviticus 26:13. It's the word used when Gideon's men smashed their jars and revealed the torches hidden inside in Judges 7:19. It's the word used in Psalm 51:17 when David cries, "A broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise." Breaking, in Hebrew thought, isn't always negative. Sometimes breaking is liberation. Sometimes shattering is revelation. The jar must break for the light to shine through. The yoke must snap for the captive to walk free. The hard heart must crack for the tender heart to emerge. Shin is present in all of it, not as a destroyer but as a midwife, facilitating the painful but necessary process of birth. What's dying isn't you. What's breaking isn't your destiny. What's shattering is the false container that was never big enough to hold what God placed inside you. Then there's shav, one of the most beautiful words in the Hebrew Bible. It means to return, but it carries the weight of repentance, restoration, and realignment. The prophets used this word constantly. "Return to me," God pleaded through Jeremiah. "Return to the Lord your God," Joel begged. Shav appears over 1,000 times in Scripture, often in contexts of exile, wandering, and lostness. But here's what makes it profound. The journey of return always involves fire. The prodigal son didn't return to his father's house until he hit rock bottom, until his resources burned away, until his pride crumbled to ash. Israel didn't return to God until their rebellion led them into Babylonian exile, where the fires of discipline consumed their idolatry. Shin marks the path of return, because return requires burning away everything that led to departure in the first place. You can't go back to who you were. You can only return to who you were always meant to be. And that requires fire. That requires Shin. That requires the refining process that destroys your false self and resurrects your true identity. Now consider shalom, perhaps the most misunderstood word in the Bible. Western Christianity has reduced shalom to peace in the sense of absence of conflict. But in Hebrew, shalom means wholeness, completeness, restoration of divine order. Shalom isn't passive. It's active reconstruction. It's the return of Eden, the healing of fracture, the reunion of heaven and earth. And here's the mystery. True shalom only comes after shavar, after the breaking. Jesus said in John 12:24, "Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds." Death precedes multiplication. Breaking precedes blessing. The fire of Shin creates the conditions for shalom by destroying everything that prevents wholeness. Your false peace, built on control, comfort and avoidance, must be shattered so true peace can emerge. The structures you built to protect yourself from pain are the same structures preventing you from experiencing the fullness God intended. Shin comes to break them, not to harm you, but to heal you, not to destroy your life, but to resurrect it. And then there's Shaddai, the name of God that appears 48 times in Scripture, often translated Almighty. But the root meaning goes deeper. Shaddad means to overpower or to devastate. Shaddai is the God who has power over devastation, who controls the overwhelming forces of nature and history. He's the God who sets boundaries for the sea, who limits the reach of chaos, who says to the storm, "This far and no further." Indeed, when Job encountered catastrophic loss, God revealed himself not as the distant cosmic force, but as Shaddai, the God sufficient for every trial, the God whose power exceeds every pain. Shin is present in his name because his presence is fire. He doesn't promise to remove the fire, he promises to be with you in it. He doesn't guarantee an easy path, he guarantees his sufficiency for the hardest paths. Shaddai is the God who walks through flames without being burned, who refines without abandoning, who breaks only to rebuild. And what no one expected was this: the same letter that begins words of destruction also begins words of restoration. The fire that burns is the fire that heals. The God who wounds is the God who binds up. This is where everything shifts. There's a moment in every refining process where the silver reaches critical mass, a tipping point where the impurities are almost gone, but the heat must remain steady. Pull the silver out too soon and the purity is compromised. Leave it too long and damage occurs. This is where most people break. This is where faith falters. This is the moment where you're desperate for the fire to stop, where you're convinced you can't endure another second, where you beg God to release you from the furnace. But the refiner knows something you don't. He sees what you can't. The reflection is almost clear. Your face is almost visible. The image is almost restored. And so the heat continues. Not because he's cruel, because he's committed, not because he enjoys your pain, because he refuses to let you settle for less than purity. This is the valley of decision. This is where shallow faith evaporates and tested faith emerges. This is where religious performance burns away and genuine relationship is forged. The fire reveals who you really are. And for most people, that revelation is terrifying. History is filled with testimonies of believers who encountered the refiner's fire and emerged transformed. George Muller, the 19th century Christian who pioneered faith-based ministry, faced years of financial desperation. He fed thousands of orphans without ever asking for money, trusting God alone to provide. But there were nights when there was no food, no funds, no visible solution. The fire burned hot, the pressure was unbearable. Yet Muller later wrote that those moments of utter dependence refined his faith more than a lifetime of easy provision ever could. The fire didn't destroy his ministry, it purified his motives. Corrie ten Boom survived Nazi concentration camps and spent the rest of her life teaching about forgiveness. But she admitted that the refining didn't end when the war did. For years afterward, she wrestled with bitterness, hatred, and trauma. The fire of suffering had exposed impurities in her soul that comfortable Christianity had never revealed. It took decades of God's refining work to bring her to the place where she could genuinely forgive her captors. The furnace was long, the heat was intense, but what emerged was a woman whose testimony would transform millions. This is what Shin does in personal experience. It strips away the facades, the religious masks, the personas you constructed to gain approval. You thought you were mature until the fire revealed your insecurity. You thought you were surrendered until the fire exposed your control issues. You thought you had faith until the fire uncovered your self-reliance. This isn't condemnation, this is revelation. God isn't surprised by what the fire reveals. He already knew it was there. The fire isn't for his benefit, it's for yours. You can't heal what you won't acknowledge. You can't surrender what you won't see. The refiner's fire brings everything to the surface, not to shame you, but to free you. Every character flaw, every hidden wound, every unhealed trauma, the fire draws it out like poison from a wound. And yes, the process is agonizing. Yes, it feels like death, but it's not. It's birth. It's the breaking of the old wineskin so the new wine can be poured. It's the shattering of the false self so the true self can emerge. It's the death of who you thought you were so you can become who you really are. But here's where the narrative takes a crucial turn. The fire isn't arbitrary. It's purposeful. It's not random chaos. It's divine orchestration. The refiner doesn't just throw silver into a furnace and walk away. He controls the temperature, monitors the process, and determines the duration. This means that what you're experiencing right now, the pressure, the pain, the upheaval, isn't out of control. It's under control, God's control. The circumstances may feel chaotic, but they're not. They're calibrated. The heat may feel unbearable, but it's not. It's precisely measured. The timing may feel wrong, but it's not. It's exactly right. This is the hardest truth to accept in the middle of the fire, that what feels like abandonment is actually intimate attention. That what seems like punishment is actually preparation. That what looks like destruction is actually reconstruction. The refiner hasn't left you. He's sitting beside the furnace, watching every moment, adjusting the temperature, protecting you from more heat than you can handle. His eyes never leave the crucible. His attention never wavers. And he's waiting, not for you to break, but for his reflection to appear. And then, just when you think you can't endure another moment, something shifts. The pressure eases, the heat stabilizes, the chaos settles, and you realize something has changed. You're not the same person you were when the fire started. The anxiety that used to control you has loosened its grip. The fear that used to paralyze you has lost its power. The need for approval that used to drive your decisions has faded. You're lighter, freer, more yourself than you've ever been. This is what emerges from the refiner's fire, not a perfect person, but a purified one. Not someone who never struggles, but someone who struggles from a place of security rather than insecurity. Not someone who has all the answers, but someone who knows the one who does. The fire didn't make you flawless, it made you free. And that freedom becomes the foundation for everything that comes next. What happened next would change everything. Because once you've been refined, you can't be controlled. Once you've been through the fire, you can't be intimidated. Once you've survived the furnace, you can't be shaken. This is what God is doing in 2026. This is what Shin represents. This is the hidden meaning of the fire. He's creating a generation that cannot be manipulated, cannot be seduced by comfort, cannot be deterred by opposition. A generation refined by fire, and nothing will stop them. There's an ancient Jewish teaching that says, before the Messiah comes, there will be a season of great shaking, not to destroy the faithful, but to reveal what cannot be shaken. This teaching, rooted in prophetic passages like Haggai 2:6-7, speaks of a divine disruption so profound that only what is built on eternal foundations will remain. Everything else, every false belief, every earthly security, every temporary structure will collapse. This isn't pessimism, it's promise. Because what remains after the shaking is more solid, more real, more trustworthy than anything that existed before. The fire of Shin is this shaking. The year 5786 is this season. And those who understand the process aren't running from the fire. They're leaning into it. They're asking God not for escape, but for endurance. They're praying not for the heat to decrease, but for the impurities to surface. Because they know that what's on the other side of this fire is worth every moment of the burning. The new thing God is building in this season doesn't look like the old thing. It can't. New wine requires new wineskins, Jesus taught. You can't pour the revelation of this era into the structures of the last one. The programs, systems, and methods that worked in previous seasons are crumbling not because they were bad, but because they're insufficient for what's coming. God is raising up a generation that doesn't need hype to worship, doesn't need programs to pray, doesn't need platforms to prophesy. He's building a people who carry his presence in their very DNA, who function as walking temples, mobile altars, living sacrifices. The fire is removing everything that would hinder this new reality. The buildings can burn, the budgets can collapse, the brands can fade. What emerges from the ashes is a church that looks more like the Book of Acts than the modern Western model. Raw, risky, relational, revivalist. This is what Shin is birthing. This is what the fire is preparing. And those who resist the process will miss the promise. But this isn't just about the collective. It's intensely personal. God isn't just refining the church. He's refining you. The pressures you're facing aren't obstacles to your destiny. They're the pathway to it. The relationships that ended, they were never meant to go where you're going. The job you lost, it was limiting what God wanted to release through you. The identity you mourned, it was a false self that had to die so your true self could live. Every loss is a liberation. Every ending is a beginning. Every death is a resurrection. But you'll only see this in retrospect. In the moment, it feels like destruction. Only later do you realize it was renovation. The old floor had to be ripped up before the new foundation could be poured. The old walls had to come down before the new architecture could be revealed. You're not falling apart, you're being rebuilt. And the new version, the refined version, will astonish you. You'll look back at who you were before the fire and barely recognize that person, not because you've become someone else, but because you've finally become yourself, the person God always intended. The person buried under layers of performance, trauma, and conformity. The fire burned those layers away, and what's left is pure gold. This is where practical application becomes crucial. You can read this entire narrative and still miss the point if you don't respond. So here's the question. What is Shin revealing in your life right now? What is the fire exposing? Where is the heat most intense? That's where God is working. That's where the impurities are rising. That's where the refining is happening. Don't run from it. Don't numb it with distraction, entertainment, or busyness. Don't spiritualize it away with platitudes or positive thinking. Feel it. Face it. Let the fire do its work. Surrender what's burning instead of fighting to save it. Because whatever God is removing was never meant to stay. And whatever He's building will be worth the cost. Stop trying to control the process. Stop demanding timelines. Stop negotiating with God about what you're willing to sacrifice and what you want to keep. Place everything on the altar. Trust the refiner. He knows when you're ready. He knows when the reflection is clear. He knows when the process is complete. And He cannot leave you in the fire one moment longer than necessary, but neither will He remove you prematurely just because you're uncomfortable. Your comfort isn't His priority. Your character is. Your convenience isn't His goal. Your Christ-likeness is. And here's the final revelation, the truth that ties everything together. The fire you're experiencing now is preparing you for the fire you'll carry later. Moses met God in the burning bush before he led Israel out of Egypt. Elijah called down fire from heaven only after he'd been refined in the wilderness. The disciples received the fire of Pentecost only after they'd endured the fire of Christ's crucifixion. Every person who carries God's presence has first been processed by God's fire. This isn't punishment, it's preparation. You're not being destroyed, you're being deputized. The very thing that feels like it's breaking you is actually building you. The season that seems like it's ending your ministry is actually launching it. The process that looks like failure is actually training for future victory. This is the mystery of Shin. This is the hidden message of 2026. God is burning away everything in you that cannot carry what He's about to release through you. And when the fire is finished, when the reflection is clear, when the impurities are gone, when the refining is complete, you will step into a season unlike anything you've known, not because you earned it, because you endured it, not because you were perfect, because you were purified, and the world is waiting for refined believers. Broken systems need people who've been through the fire and didn't lose their faith. Desperate souls need witnesses who've been refined and can testify that God is faithful even in the furnace. This is what Shin is creating. This is what 2026 is producing. A generation marked by fire, refined by pressure, prepared for purpose. The question isn't whether you'll go through the fire. The question is what you'll become because of it. This is where everything shifts. This is where the full weight of the revelation crashes down like thunder in the night. The letter Shin, 3 tongues of fire rising from a single base, isn't just a symbol. It's a prophetic map of what God is doing right now, in 2026, in you. The 3 prongs represent 3 dimensions of divine fire. The fire that guides, pillar of fire in the wilderness, the fire that reveals, Mount Sinai, and the fire that refines, the silversmith's furnace. And all 3 are active in this season. God is guiding you through transition you didn't choose. He's revealing truths about yourself you didn't want to see. And He's refining character in you that you didn't know needed work. But here's the part that changes everything. The base of the Shin, the horizontal line from which the 3 flames rise, represents you, the foundation, the vessel, the person being processed. And the fire doesn't destroy the base, it emerges from it. This means the fire isn't happening to you. It's happening through you. You're not the victim of this season, you're the conduit. What's burning away isn't your destiny. It's the debris blocking your destiny. And when the refining is complete, when God sees His reflection in you, when the impurities are removed and the image is restored, you won't just survive the fire, you'll carry it. You'll become what Moses became at the burning bush, a person so saturated with divine presence that your very face glows. This is the goal of Shin. This is the purpose of the fire. This is what God is really burning in 2026. Not your life, not your purpose, not your calling. He's burning everything that prevents you from becoming the flame. The ancient scribes were right. Shin was never just a letter. It was a signature, God's signature, written in fire across human history, revealing His methods, His character, His relentless commitment to refinement over comfort. When you trace the 3 strokes of Shin, you're not just drawing a symbol. You're acknowledging a process. You're submitting to a transformation. You're saying yes to the fire that burns but does not consume, to the heat that refines but does not reject, to the pressure that reveals but does not destroy. In the year 5786, as Shin marks the spiritual atmosphere and Vav connects the fire to covenant, you have a choice. You can resist the process and prolong the pain. Or you can surrender to the refiner and trust that He sees what you can't. Every metalworker knows this truth. The most valuable metals require the hottest fires. Gold melts at 1064 degrees Celsius, silver at 961 degrees, but iron, common, abundant, cheap iron, melts at only 538 degrees. The heat you're experiencing isn't proof of your worthlessness. It's proof of your value. God doesn't waste fire on things he doesn't treasure. He doesn't invest refining time on metals he doesn't intend to use. So here's the invitation, whispered from the furnace, carried on the wind, written in flames across the sky of your circumstances. Stop fighting the fire. Stop begging for premature relief. Stop demanding that God remove you from the process before the process is complete. Instead, ask him what he's refining. Ask what impurity he's exposing. Ask what false identity he's burning away. And then, and this is the hardest part, thank him for loving you enough not to leave you as you were. Thank him for the fire that hurts but heals. Thank him for the pressure that reveals but also restores. Because on the other side of this season, you will not be the same. You will be refined, purified, clarified, ready. And the reflection the refiner sees when he looks at you will no longer be clouded by impurity. It will be clear, bright, true. He will see his own face staring back at him from the surface of your life. And that's when he'll know the fire has done its work. That's when he'll remove you from the furnace, not because you complained, but because you're complete. Not because you couldn't take more heat, but because you don't need more heat. The refining is finished. The image is restored. And what emerges from the flames isn't just a survivor. It's a son, a daughter, a carrier of the very fire that refined them. Welcome to the mystery of Shin. Welcome to the purpose of the fire. Welcome to what God is really burning in 2026. It was never meant to destroy you. It was always meant to reveal him in you.